My why has always been, well, it's a path to take care of, James as a single mom. It's a path to make sure that if my brothers and sisters need something, they can have it, right? It's a path because no one else is ever going to give me money, right? It's a path to make sure that my family, right, and Paul and everyone else are taken care of. And it's interesting now for me to be like, everybody else is damn fine.
They're all good.
Where is the next adventure for me that says, is it going to take each trait that you truly like about yourself and match those up? So you're like, oh, I don't love the job anymore. I love my role in who I am in the job.
Welcome to Seriously Catherine, a podcast about taking your business seriously, but not yourself. I am excited to have you here on the Seriously Catherine podcast because I admire your leadership, your commitment to supporting women, and really most importantly for this specific program is that you are the epitome of not taking yourself so seriously. You know how there's some women out there who are like, there's going to be one seat at the table for a woman and bitch, it's going to be me. And I will like elbow and scratch your face so that I'm never surrounded by other women who may be competitive or threatening. But you're not one of those people.
No.
You're like, there's actually no limit to how many seats we can have at this table. We can make the room bigger. We can like pile everyone in like sardines. Like there's always space for more people. And I've always really appreciated that about you because it's just so evident. The other thing that I really love about you is that you don't take yourself so seriously, which happens to be the name of this podcast. So tell me how that came to be. Have you never taken yourself seriously? Like as a child, were you just a ball of energy and fun?
No. So I think that you and probably many others have heard that my past history, and it still feels weird for me to say that, right? That I don't have childhood memories where I'm like, that was so joyous and that was so amazing and that was so that was the best time of my life. I don't have those because of the environment that I grew in, right? A really abusive, psychotic type of environment. But what's interesting for me now as an adult is seeing the fact that I created memories for my brothers and sisters by protecting them and kind of standing up and being that person. So it's interesting. Childhood memories for me that are good ones are always through the eyes of my brothers and sisters. And I think the reality of that is the transition to being like more of like a fun and an outgoing person, starting to be like much more authentic. I would say kind of like triple. Number one was I had great high school friends who totally knew how I was living, right, in their means of being in high school, their ability to kind of act as rescuers to me. College was amazing. I ended up in a group of friends that to this day, 30 years later, there are 10, 11 of us, and we continue to be with each other and support each other and see each other often. And they're real as real gets. Like there is no fakery among that group. And then I would say the next one was a group of women that I worked with in the hospital system. The same thing, like incredibly intelligent and talented and competitive, but not competitive against you.
Yeah.
And really facilitated by a leader who she was so exemplary that had this knack about her, really the first person in my lifetime who came up to me like a nurse on a floor and was like, hey, I think you'd be really good in my education department. And it shocked me to the core because I don't think anybody had ever seen that in me, like hadn't pulled the, I know you think you're going to do this for the rest of your life, but it's not true, right? And so it really, those very distinctive milestones in my life, those influence really of women in my life, those are the folks who are just like, be you. Like there's nothing not you that isn't good, regardless of mistakes you might make or things that happened to you when you were growing up or stupid crap you did. There's nothing that's not you. So just be you. And by the way, you're not everybody's cup of tea, so deal with it and be happy about that too, because everybody isn't your cup of tea either.
Yeah, no, and I think like you only discover that about yourself by putting yourself out there and sort of falling on your face and, obviously seeing who shows up to help you up. And sometimes it's nobody. It's just yourself, So, okay, so tell us sort of like your trajectory of your career, right? Because you're like, when I came onto the scene, you were like this badass leader in healthcare. You were also one of the like most highest fundraisers for LLS, which is also like at the through line of a lot of things. Like I've met so many people through that organization, Jackie, you, Megan, like Jeff Schwartz, you know that guy.
I know that dude.
But the organization, the people that I've met through that group has just been incredible. And I remember, I think it was a year after I ran, you came back as like a
national candidate.
Like a national candidate, because like what, you didn't torture yourself enough running?
Not enough. I felt like round 2 would make it more simple. And my husband, Paul, absolutely did not agree with me, but he was like, hey, if you want to do this, like, I'm your person, I'll stand behind you, right? Because I think that ability of philanthropy to run through our lives, it does something professionally and personally for people.
Yeah, well, and then once you get to a certain point in your career, it just makes sense to sort of leverage that network that you've built and all those relationships and connections to do good.
It does. It does. And I would say when you had asked about really my trajectory, and so I'll talk about the trajectory in like the healthcare market, right? So ended up making a decision that I was going to go to school to be a nurse. And Lord only knows why. And I know this isn't like the right decision making, but I was a bartender at a bar, and the nursing school instructors would come in on their like Tuesday nights, right? They'd all gather. They were amazing. They were hysterical. They were so smart. And I was a bio major from Siena, and I wasn't using my degree anymore, right? Like bartending, I guess, mixing a cocktail sounds like it's research. Not really. And I just made this decision like, oh my God, like I'm going to grow up to be like my mom, because my mom's a nurse. And I swore I wanted to do it. And then I find myself like, I'm just like my mama, right? And this group of just amazing female leaders, and finding out, 2 of the nurses served in Vietnam, like realizing like I was being cared for and instructed by those people, right? I was a single mom with a little boy. I was in my anatomy and physiology class, and I brought my son in, and I will never forget the instructor just being like, it's okay. Like, you got to do what you got to do. Like, I have a daughter who's in a similar position. And you start to give that gratitude for, like, all these little things that probably set me on my path for success. So moved back to this area so James could be closer to his dad. Started working at Albany Memorial Hospital. I was with a group of friends, nursing friends last night that I grew up with. And we were talking about how much money we made. And one woman was like, I made about 85 cents an hour. And I was like, what? And she's like, no joke. And I was like, I made like $10.48. I mean, that's how far, right, we've come in this.
Yeah.
So became a nurse, came in as a float because I needed the role. Somebody thought I was smart enough to just go from like cardiology to orthopedics to surgery to oncology. Again, tapped on the shoulder to join the education department. And it was a risk. I was a single mom. I took a cut in pay overall to join the education resource department, understanding it might give me a future career path. And man, it did, right? Went from education to a clinical nurse specialist to 2 hospitals to being tapped on the shoulder to create the entire oncology and cancer service line for Samaritan Hospital and Albany Memorial Hospital. Created women's imaging centers. Philanthropically, that's a big ass word, right? We'll just talk about making money for other people. Was able to like really become involved in the community that the hospital lived in, right? Because nonprofit needs, as we both know, joining multiple boards, it is so intrinsic to having the capability for other people to have access, and to have access to simple things like food and housing and care. And when we know we can get at the basics of those, we create good people that like could be sitting in these chairs one day. And like, we don't know that right now. Amazing career. Decided I wanted to switch careers, went into pharmaceutical sales, basically. That was a show. It was amazing. Anyone who knows me knows I don't know why they gave me a job where I could drive places. Because I'm like, I'm like Michael Scott in The Office, like where it's like, turn left. And I turn left. I go into the pond because I'm like, I'm going to trust that lady in Watts, right? We're going to go this way. Worked there. I competed against NYOH in my prior life, and they recruited me. And man, what an amazing organization. The talent, the physicians, the care in the community. And they lied to me. They told me it would be a great job, and it was a great job except for the pesky pandemic. And,
yes.
The pandemic restructured very quickly my mantra, which is always do the right thing for the patient. And it restructured me to do the right thing for the employee. Because if by proxy, every employee feels cared for and valued just like we're supposed to be doing that for patients, then they will be that way for patients, right? And so what a weird... How many years did it take me to come to that, to get away from that mantra of do what's the right thing for the patient? Because actually I was asking people to sacrifice themselves and their own health and their own wellness on the back of someone else.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of like a through line to like yourself too. Like you got to take care of yourself so that you can take care of other people to the best of your ability.
True. The whole oxygen mask thing is very, like, it's so funny we hear it over and over and
Yeah, we
over
do.
again. And then
Yeah.
we're like, forget it. I'm not going to do that. Meanwhile, we're on the floor gasping as like leaders or facilitators or friends and forgetting that really simple mantra of, are you ever going to take care of yourself? And I would even push that. I talked about this at Business Summit. We can all talk about all these people that we fell in love with, right? So whether that is like true romantic love with a significant other, or that's falling in love with friends or ideas. And I'm pushing myself right now, like, how do I fall back in love with myself? Because I'm going to seriously say I never have been, but I'll pretend that I am, but I really don't.
I know, but like, isn't this so fascinating to hear from like the most authentic person we know to say that she doesn't really give herself that romance?
No
for
grace,
yourself.
no romance, no self-focus. It's been really interesting for me now in this time of like silence and transition into where my next role is, and really trying to sit back and say, wait, hold on a second. What's my why, right? And my why has always been, well, it's a path to take care of, James as a single mom. It's a path to make sure that if my brothers and sisters needed something, they could have it, right? It's a path because no one else was ever going to give me money, right? It's a path to make sure that my family, right, and Paul and everyone else are taken care of. And it's interesting now for me to be like, everybody else is damn fine.
They're
like,
all good.
Where is the next adventure for me
you.
that says, is it going to take each trait that you truly like about yourself and match those up? So you're like, oh, I don't love the job anymore. I love my role and who I am in the job. It's going to be a mind mess for me, I think.
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm so excited for you though. Like, so I'm trying to think of exactly how I found out you left NYOH, but it was sort of like a shock to me, because I just always thought like, wow, you're at the top of your game. Yep. You're in this role. You have so much impact and you have so much power, right? I mean, like, just call it what it is. Yep. You have like this opportunity to sort of like steer the course of the healthcare industry, walking away, and then now you're like, okay, well then now what? But like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be what's next. It could just be like what you're doing right now is just being with yourself.
I think that you summarized right there is the challenge, right? So the challenge is that romance, right, with NYOH was deep, but it wasn't going to be forever. And I had said that when I joined, like the running joke was, she's only here 3 to 5 years. She's only here 3 to 5 years. When I hit that 5 years, and the organization's going to go through its own transition, right? They're moving from a management organization of US Oncology to a management organization of One Oncology. And sometimes you have to look at your own leadership, right? My tenets are, I'm a strategic visionary. I'm a culture creator, right? I celebrate others. Really, where NYOH needs to go right now is they need to buckle down in like day-to-day grit of operations. Like the way somebody answers a phone or transfers a call, that is not my cup of tea. It's not me. They really need to have that strength there and move away a little bit more, I think, from the Sabrina Mosseau of, we're going to open a women's imaging center at Kira, right? We're going to grow a surgical service line. We're going to continue to subspecialize. We're going to get you through a pandemic. We're going to build a $55 million regional cancer center. Like, those are big ideas, and they're great, and they're amazing, and I led every single one of them. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of, if people are not answering the phone appropriately,
right,
then where are we? And again, I think it goes back to a question you asked earlier. Why can't we always get those people or keep those people? Maybe there's some leadership issues.
I don't know if this is going to make any sense, but like, we need to glamorize some of these jobs that are so fundamental to our existence. Like, for example, so me and Jackie were at coffee yesterday on Broadway, and I could not stop looking at this crossing guard. He was having the time of his life. He was dancing. He was like directing traffic. He was like helping old ladies cross the street and saying, yeah, I could hear him say, yes, ma'am. Have a great day, ma'am. And I'm like, you know what? Some people may look at that role and think, I don't want to be a crossing guard, or I don't want to be like wearing some yellow, orange vest and hard hat in the middle of Broadway on a beautiful day, like directing idiots who just can't watch the light and see that there's like a construction vehicle ahead, like instead he was like having the time of his life. And I have had some experiences where I have to call, CDPHP for insurance. You get on the phone, you're like, And more times than not, the people who pick up the phone are like not miserable. Right. Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that.
It's the most incredible thing, you know?
Imagine that.
And I think like how do we replicate that across the board?
I might be the rebel in this one as well, though. So my rebel outlook on that is we've facilitated for a long time this incredible value in education. And believe me, I absolutely am pro-education, pro-college, pro-secondary, pro-certifications, the whole nine yards. But I wonder if somehow like we've lost sight of that soft skill period, right? So when I always go back to hard skills, like and drives me nuts, you see job applications that are like, knows Microsoft Excel. For any job hunters out there, I ain't great in it. Like I can work in it, but I haven't found the value to have to dive into it, okay? It doesn't make me a better or worse candidate than someone else. But my soft skills are probably more important, right? That I can negotiate, that I want to listen carefully, right? And answer thoughtfully, that I want to facilitate other people, like you said earlier. Not only facilitate their seat at the table, but when I'm not there, can they take that lesson and empower themselves to pull up their own seat, even though it's nerve-wracking and wrenching, or to create that space for another person? And I really believe that we are in a crux of issues right now where we're not paying attention to all of those soft skills, that perhaps sometimes we should not really care about your education unless it comes with a license or a certification. But we really should say, what are your soft skills? But get the people with the soft skills. And you can pick that up in an interview pretty quickly and go for them more than people with more experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think too, it's fun to go to lunch with people, like for interviews, because you can really get a very good sense of how they treat others, how
Yes.
how they treat the hired help or
Yes.
any of that stuff. And I don't know. I think these are things, maybe it's just my Southern hospitality. I was just brought up to be this way and friendly and
Yes.
charismatic. But yeah, Excel, I don't know how to do functions in Excel. I think also with technology, we're seeing like this next generation, they communicate differently, they have different values. So I hate this storyline that we're hearing, like Gen Z, they don't want to work. And I just think that's such bullshit. They just don't want to work for you because you're an asshole.
Nope. They don't want to work for you, and they're so over the stupid corporate language, right? So they're so over the language of, let's create a playbook. And they think playbook, and they're like, is that like a big piece of paper that looks like Moby Dick and Huck Finn combined, and I have to read through that, right? They're pointing out our lack sometimes, depending upon how we grew up, who influenced us, right? Our age sometimes. They're pointing out our lack of actually innovation and curiosity. I definitely learned this. I'm a Gen X, so I'm a psychopath about like, you work and you work hard, right? And you work all the time. Well, I probably got a little bit of that boomer type of thing in me. Other generations are like, you are not healthy unless you establish work boundaries. If you're a leader or a manager and you're paying your staff at 10 and 11 o'clock at night and 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, what are you doing? Like, is that your martyr status? Like, what are you doing to create something where other people are literally staring at you with I don't need to be here because nothing you sent me was important or valuable or life-saving. Where's my boundaries? And so I'm so excited our younger generation is so much better about their boundary setting.
Yes.
But the reaction they're getting is not great, right? They're getting the title of they're lazy or they're entitled or they don't want to do it, when really they're saying there's a faster, better, easier way to do it. And guess what? When 4 o'clock comes, you're right. I'm leaving.
Yeah, well, and I think, too, there's this conversation or dialogue around, like, everyone left the workforce during COVID. And so, they're going to come back. And I'm like, newsflash, they ain't come back. They're all doing other shit. They're working side hustles. They're, staying at home. They're choosing to stay at home. They're becoming entrepreneurs, So I think, like, until that corporate world sort of shifts, which I do think is possible, change is a-coming, but it's going to take a strategic approach of partnership, collaboration, meeting people at the table, right? I also think there's a wave of like, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to start my own business. I'm never going to work for the man again because like, screw that guy. And he never had my back. And it's like, okay, well, that guy still got the power. He still got all the money. And so we got to like, work with him for a little bit and let him like go quietly into the night gracefully.
Yes.
Transfer peaceful power.
Yes. Funny. I grew up in healthcare. They're the slowest and hardest ship, and probably the most resistant ship, I think, to turn sometimes. They're fully capable of doing it. And we've seen that multiple times. We actually saw it in the pandemic, how quickly people were able to move and facilitate and change, right, within the world of healthcare. But there is a middle ground, right? And the middle ground is there are always going to be people in positions of power, period, hard stop. That scale tips depending upon where you are and what industry you're in. But the real question here is these people are innovative and creative and everything else. Like, if you cannot see the fact that they need to be at the table to be really challenging, even if they say something and you're like, that's bonkers, there's a shred of truth in there. And maybe it's bonkers right now, but it's not bonkers 6 months from now and a year from now. And those leaders who refuse to even hear a different innovative or creative idea, they're actually the most dangerous, because I would go back to, they're not leaders, they're managers, and they're attempting to manage people, but they're not leading them. They're just stifling them. And by the way, those people end up leaving. They'll find something else different to do. And like you said, there's a million different opportunities out there right now.
But that side of it is also challenging,
It
right?
is.
The grass is not always greener.
No.
And we talked about this too, how do you put yourself out there if you're looking for something? And you're in this leadership role. I mean, we do live in a pretty small community. Everybody knows everybody, Capital Region. It's like, so if Sabrina is leaving that, well, I think there are people who are like, oh, we're just waiting to see where she ends up because she must have had something lined up. And I just want to dispel that myth. Like, we don't all have this crystal ball. We don't have a clear defined pathway. I think people like us like the undefined pathway and the one that hasn't even been chartered yet. It's exciting, it's stressful, it's a little, it's a risky move.
It is a risky move.
So would like for you to share a little bit
risky
of your insights.
Risky. So it is, you hit so many of those nails on the head. So I remember when the article came out in the Albany Business Review, right? And then my phone just blew up. And it was a lot of, tell me where you're going.
Where are you going?
Tell me where you're going. Tell me where you're going.
Give me the insider scoop.
I'm literally like from my bedroom to my living room. And it was such an interesting, and still continues, right, to be an interesting moment. How do you put yourself back out there? I just started making phone calls and text messages to people, right? Especially in the world of the industry, right? So where do I belong, right? If I'm going to do I need to fall in love with myself and not the job role and the people that I work with, because all of that will come, right? If I'm truly in love with myself, then I actually had to sit down and do a inventory of what makes me happy, like utilizing anything in science, right? I'm a dork, I'm a geek, I'm a nerd. I love everything about science. Okay, check mark, right? Find a role that has that scientific bent to it. Love to teach, love to educate, love to share. Okay, is there a role that has that embedded in that as well? Want to create things. Is there a role where there's uncertainty embedded in the role, where someone's like, I know that we don't really know what we want to do, but we think we wanted to do this. Then I'm like, that's my role. Those are the cool things that bring me into a role or into a job. And it's just continuous for me right now. It's picking up the phone when people call. It's not, I was sharing with you earlier, I had a physician I used to work with reach out to me and was like, hey, here's something I'm thinking about doing. Are you interested? And I was like, I am absolutely curious. Now, I don't know if it fits all the boxes yet, but I'm super curious. And I was like, okay, well, then we got to get under an NDA to have this conversation. And it's just that willingness, I think, to be like, I want to do those, but what's interesting to me is and I guess it's the change in the career too, is how will you be happy if you're not the boss? And it's never about being the boss. And I think that's where it goes back to, there's a definite definition between people who supervise, people manage, people who are leaders, and people who are bosses. And the title is actually meaningless when it comes down to the person and the personality, right? Mm-hmm. So you can have a supervisor or a McDonald's who's probably better than the owner, if you look at it that way. And that's because of their traits. And so I think that's hard for people when I talk to you to wrap their head around I don't need 500 people reporting up through me. I need to have that opportunity still care for people, mentor people, to be able to help people think themselves out of difficult situations, especially in work and work-related situations.
Well, I also think this is part of your brand though, right? People just think of you as a leader and of an organization where you're going to have a big impact. And I think sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their brains around managing that.
Yes.
And it's like, well, how is that going to go? Well, it's like, well, if I'm really good at my job, you won't have to manage me.
Right.
you'll just let me go, do
Yes.
the damn thing, and deliver on what we've discussed and agreed upon. Another thing that I just think is so cool about you is you have no ego, and because it's like there's something bigger at play. And it's not about the title. It's not about that. It's about getting it done.
It's about the people. There's this quote, I'll probably not remember completely, but I've had it for years and years and years. And it's something like, I get out of bed every single morning, determined to change the world and have a hell of a good time. Sometimes that makes planning my day difficult. That's my world, right? I want to find places where I can change the world. That doesn't necessarily always mean being the boss of other people. Leadership in my future again, being the boss of other people? Sure, probably. It's just my weird trajectory always ends up there. But it's how do you continue to change the world and then say, am I having a hell of a good time doing it, right?
Yeah, well,
and there's the balance.
Right. But I also just think like, yes, you'll be in leadership because you're naturally good at it and people want to work for you. That's where you put you. Like what other thing? I mean, sure, you could be the crossing guard, but is it the best use of your time? Probably not.
Probably not.
If I was in that position, I was telling Jackie, I'm like, if I was in that spot, like in the middle of Broadway and Lake Avenue directing traffic and there's like these big trucks and you're distracted for 1 second and there's death.
There's death and destruction.
People are dead.
And horns.
And horns.
And produce falling out of the back of trucks.
Seriously, I was just like,
Broadway.
No one recognizes. I mean, maybe everyone recognizes how hard this guy's working. Like, I can't remember the exact first time that I ever met you, but I think you were wearing a superhero cape and maybe a mask.
I was.
Yes, and you were fundraising, but it was like, you were dressed in costume, but I think you could raise, like, how much money did you raise? Like over 50 grand or something?
Yeah, really
absurd.
quickly, really easily the second time around.
Is that part of just your ethos is like, listen, I'm going to fall on my face and laugh about it. And that in itself is success because it's inspiring other people to put themselves out there.
Maybe the driving force, right, and it's such a big question, is I'm attracted to other authentic people. When I meet those people, I'm like, those are my peeps, right? Those are amazing human beings. You know when you meet somebody that you're just like, oh, this person is a person, right? This woman is a woman. This human being is just going to be like, is it going to be vulnerable? And is it going to take that vulnerability too seriously and is okay with being vulnerable? And it goes back to maybe there's a realization like I'm not everybody's cup of tea. Mm-hmm. Like there are people who don't think it's funny that I'm obsessed with dad jokes. I know that. I know that people give me stupid little side eye like, she's so boring, she's so stupid. I don't care because you're not my friend.
Well, I also think though, like you find those people who have those values and show up in the world that way when you fall on your face.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Agreed.
Like what other opportunity do you have to attract those people to you except when you're, just, open mouth, insert foot, said something like you shouldn't have said and embarrassed yourself. And it's like those people who are like, oh my gosh, I naturally embarrass myself all the time too. We should be friends.
Yes.
But have you ever seen, there's like this meme and it always pops up and I don't know if people sharing it with me, but they're like, they meet you and they're like, how are you the marketing director of a a chemical plant, or like how are you the CEO of a healthcare practice, like how are you the whatever. And it's like, I think you're like that.
I think sometimes you have to go home but do the same thing, look in the mirror and be like, how did I get away with that today? Like how are people like, yeah, you go, and you were like, I don't know how I made it through the day.
I think that there's like a magic about it too, how we naturally disarm people with our ridiculousness and the not taking ourselves so seriously. And I just think we get further that way because it's like, okay, let's level the playing field. Let's all just be human. We're all a bunch of like humans trying to get through the day. But like we also want to get shit done. So can we just like forget about all that like minutia, small talk and get to it? Okay, so last thing, and I know we probably already talked about this, but like, do you have an example or a story or anecdote like of a time when you didn't take yourself seriously, but you took the task at hand or the career or the project or the role seriously?
Oh, yeah. So I would actually rephrase it. Like, is there a time in my life where I was like, you just screwed up big time? And then you were like, well, there's not much I can do about that now except embrace it for what it is, right? And so it's so funny, and it's probably one of those things where you're like, oh, you could have put yourself into like a career-ending move. So I had been asked by individuals to put together basically a list of people that I worked with, right? And the kind of like what were their driving factors when they're placed under stress, right? What are their driving factors when they're looking to make like a huge decision or something else like this? And so, of course, right, I'm going to approach that because A, I understand the assignment. B, I think it's a stupid assignment. I don't agree with this. So yeah, I'll put together your stuff, right? So I'm doing things like next to people like likes to talk and really isn't interested in other people's opinions, right? Would be happier if the company would just buy them a car and leave them alone. Like, because that's who I am, correct? And by the way, I wasn't wrong. Because you're looking for your driving, like, what's that thing that this person is pretending is going to perhaps meet their happiness? Then that list got to the hands of the very people that I wrote it about. And I was like, well, my bad, but it wasn't wrong. Like, nothing in there was cruel, right? Because there's not cruelty in me. If I had known it would hit them, right, would I have done anything different? No, I just would have been the person to prep them for it, right? And there's the difference of being allowed to be authentic, but prep somebody for the receiving message that you may not have had the time to craft the message to their particular personality or need or outline or whatever else. But the reality is, like, were you given the opportunity to craft the message? And that was my like big boo-hoo. I should have crafted the message and said at the end of the day, here's what I put together. Here's full insight into the why and some of the corresponding what the fresh effery did you just do? I was like, but wasn't wrong.
Right.
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 And again, but if I was allowed to craft the message out on the why and the discussion behind it, it would not have felt like such a big foo-foo
like you
type
weren't
of
taking
event.
it seriously.
Absolutely.
I love that. I mean, if anyone knows you, they know they're going to get that type of response.
I think where the interesting thing sometimes in leadership is that when you see people who function with malice towards other people, and you see it from like a mile away, and perhaps people that have different positions of power in an organization don't see it because those human beings manage up, but they step on everyone below them. And I think the thing that those people hate the most, especially when they're women, is that they can't stand authentic women in the workplace. They can't stand the fact of just somebody showing up as their true, authentic self, right? Saying, hey, I make mistakes and maybe I screwed up and I'm so sorry I sent an email and I didn't think to include you, or I started a text message and it wasn't my intent that you weren't on it. Like, apologize with authenticity. And I do believe that that's probably another structural issue in the workplace, especially for women, is individuals who truly want to show up authentically themselves, but there's these bad kind of malicious players, call them sometimes martyrs, right? Never barter with a martyr type of a story. But all of a sudden, these people, and sometimes women in positions of either real power or perceived power, are then trying to squash other women's authenticity. And sometimes it works.
I mean, yeah, sometimes it works, but also like the why are they that way? It's because they've never been able to be their authentic self. It's a very scary thing to step into the light and say, you know what, this is who I am. And there's no defense mechanism. There's no cover up. It is what it is. It is. And it's a very scary, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to be that and show up that way every single day. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Those women also feel like they put up this armor, they put up this barrier to get into these positions. And so it's not fair. No. It's not fair that this one gets to come in behind me and does it more efficiently and effectively as her authentic self. It's just like, just not fair.
Like, why? Yeah.
It's like, well, it's just life, you know? And I mean, again, I'm so driven by making sure my daughters, like that's really when I started to feel like, oh shit, I really have to show up in the way that I want my girls to feel comfortable showing up, because that was like a flip switch sort of season in my life when that happened. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I gotta cut the shit and just like show up as myself, because it's also exhausting to have those layers of armor.
It is. It doesn't reflect who you really are, and how crazy if you put up a fake front and then people find out. Like, what? Like, then what am I supposed to do with that information? Be who you really are supposed to be, want to be, and others want to see you.
Right. I mean, and that in itself is a strength to say, like, you know what? Like, I'm doing my best. Mm-hmm. This is the best. Yes. And I can do better. I can improve. I can work on it. But like, I am who I am.
Yeah.
And
my socks match today. Like, victory. Like, let's get cracking, right? The 5-year-old actually put on their own shoes. Like, there's a damn miracle. Like, somebody learned how to work in Excel. Woo!
Yay! I mastered Excel. Well, thank you so much for being here. I have to have you back because we need like a follow-up on like what's happening next.
Yes, it would. I would love that moment. And so thankful to you too, right? There's always this curious energy that you bring. And I would be remiss if I didn't also say that your authenticity, definitely a conversation for another day, that it's not easy every day, right? Getting up and sometimes like these smiles that we wear and this joy and everything else that we bring. Sometimes we're crying in the car on the way to something. To be able to share that with other people, I think really opens the door for people to say, like, is that self-help for me? Am I going to be able to get some other help? Because we're carrying way too many loads to not be authentic about saying, by the way, sometimes we're going to need some help. So you have inspired me with that. That next path in my journey is, I don't think I can fall in love with myself unless I get some help for myself at the same time.
Yeah,
so thank you.
And just believing the people around you, that you're the shit, you're awesome, you are deserving of all the things that you can possibly dream up, and that they are attainable.
Yes, agreed, my friend. Agreed.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you want to connect with me, slide into my DMs on Instagram. My handle is Catherine Hover.